You can learn fluent Spanish. No matter what you've tried before that hasn't worked, I'm about to show you that you can learn fluent Spanish in 12 months or less. I'm going to show you the techniques that thousands of our students have used to overcome the same obstacles that you're facing. And it all comes down to one simple concept that may or may not involve pieces of broken glass. LearnCraft Spanish has been successfully helping people achieve Spanish fluency for over 10 years. Way back in 2015, we helped Raghav go from zero Spanish to testing out of the highest level of college Spanish in just 8 weeks. Since then, we've helped thousands of students connect with their Spanish-speaking in-laws, friends, neighbors, and coworkers in fluent Spanish. And also, we're still the only Spanish program in the world that has our students do fluent interviews in Spanish at the end of the program. We've collected dozens and dozens of these interviews, many of them in just the last year, and you'll see new ones rolling in every month at learncraftspanish.com/testimonials. So in the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to try to convince you that you can do it. Spanish fluency is not magic, it's not witchcraft, it's actually a process you can follow step by step. And if you start now, you might be fluent in Spanish 12 months from now. To do that, let's talk about some of the obstacles that people face on the path to fluency and then how to overcome them. Because yes, learning fluent Spanish is hard. Anyone who says you can easily learn Spanish has very low standards. If we're talking about actually being able to talk with people on most topics, sure, maybe it's easy to learn things like the apple is red or the pig wants cheese, but if you're actually trying to have conversations with native speakers on all kinds of topics, that's hard to accomplish. It comes with challenges, but every one of those challenges can be overcome, as I'm about to show you. So what I'm going to show you in this video is how Spanish can be so simple that learning it is as simple as putting Lego bricks together. I'll show you what all of our most successful students have in common, and it's probably going to surprise you. It's not more money or youth or language smarts. I'll show you how to save time learning Spanish so that you can get to fluency faster without spending hours and hours of extra time every day burning yourself out. I'll show you how our students overcome the fear of speaking Spanish and actually break through to deeper connection. And it all comes down to one tactic that you can use to make Spanish more simple and straightforward. Right now, I'm guessing Spanish doesn't feel simple or straightforward at all. If you're like most Spanish learners, you probably feel like this. These are quotes from real emails that I get from Spanish learners. So basically, Spanish feels like a big, overwhelming, and painful mess. It can be super frustrating because you learn all these verbs, all these conjugations, these pronunciation rules, sentence structures, and ultimately, what it really feels like when you're trying to put Spanish together is that it's a big puzzle with a billion pieces. Imagine that there's a wine glass shattered on the floor, and your job is to put this back together so that it can hold water again. This seems impossible. So you pick up one piece, you wonder how it might connect with any of the other millions of pieces, and Spanish is the same way. So there are always tens of thousands of words, millions of verb conjugations, and literally billions of possible combinations of words. At the same time, you know that it's theoretically possible to learn Spanish. So, for example, maybe you know someone who has learned Spanish as a second language, and they just seemed like a natural. Maybe it's your friend Bethany, and she spent 9 months on Spanish and became completely fluent. Whenever you see Bethany working on Spanish, it's amazing. It's like watching a magician pick up random pieces of glass and just stick them together effortlessly. For you, you put all this effort in and the pieces just don't fit together. It's like you're doing two completely different projects. But here's the secret. It is not magic. If Bethany can learn Spanish, then so can you. And here's why. Spanish is one language. All the little pieces of the language that Bethany figured out how to put together are the exact same pieces that you would need to figure out in order to become fluent. And maybe you don't have a special gift for how to put those pieces together, but even so, if you had an instruction manual for which pieces to grab first, what order to put them together, you could do exactly that. You could pick up the exact same pieces that Bethany did, put them together one after another, and before long, you could put the language together step by step. And this is objectively true. When Bethany learned Spanish, what she did was a list of very specific things. There are specific grammatical skills, sentence structures, verbs, all those elements that make Spanish what it is. She learned them, and you can do the exact same things. So the principle here is that learning is not magic. It's always a series of individual skills that you can develop. And at least in theory, the whole Spanish language can be reduced to a series of steps that anyone can follow. And sure, maybe some people like Bethany don't see it as a series of steps. Maybe they're just natural at sticking pieces together almost at random. But what I would suggest is not following a random approach. Instead, break those skills down and master them individually, specifically starting with the biggest pieces and moving down to the smaller ones step by step, getting each piece solid the whole way. That way, instead of being overwhelmed by all the pieces, you always just have one next biggest piece to pick up and put together in the right order. That's the LearnCraft approach. And here's the best news of all. For the first time ever, there is an instruction manual for putting the pieces together. We've spent 11 years figuring it out for you. We've meticulously cataloged every single piece of the broken glass required for learning Spanish. We've figured out which are the biggest pieces to put together first for the fastest and best results. And we've documented all the instructions for putting it together. You don't have to be a natural like Bethany, and you don't have to figure it out on your own. You just have to follow the steps. If you do, all those things that you thought were overwhelming or impossible or completely infinite and endless can simply be a series of steps. So in the rest of the video, what I'm going to cover is how Spanish grammar is not magic. It can be a series of steps that you follow to master. We're starting with grammar because that is the number one thing that makes Spanish different from English. Then we'll also talk about how Spanish listening comprehension is not magic. You can master it step by step as well. And then we'll wrap up with another thing that students find really overwhelming, which is the idea of speaking face-to-face confidently. Even that can be a series of steps that you follow. It doesn't have to be magic. But let's start by simplifying the Spanish language in terms of grammar. This is something that really overwhelms most learners who are starting to get serious about learning Spanish. Here are some very common complaints about trying to master this language and realizing that grammar is one of the biggest things that's holding you back from expressing yourself. When you're staring at the millions of options, at the huge mess of glass shards, it may feel like you'll never master it all. Let's say, for example, that you're working on the verb decir, which means to say or to tell. This verb is extremely common, but it's tricky to use. So Spanish speakers use it with both direct and indirect object pronouns, as well as in all different tenses and moods. And it's a super irregular verb. But then when you go and try to practice it, maybe you search online for examples, or you ask ChatGPT to help you out, you always get either baby talk or a bunch of words you don't really need to practice right now. It's usually both at the same time, as you can see here. So how are you actually supposed to practice verbs like decir in a way that's really valuable and that challenges you but doesn't overwhelm you? The answer is surprisingly simple, and it goes back to that shattered wine glass that we saw earlier. That wine glass gives us a system that thousands of our students have used to master the verb decir once and for all. The principle is simply to learn all your Spanish words and grammar in frequency order. If you do that, you can turn the whole language into a step-by-step process, including complex grammar. So check out this list. This is the top 100 words as spoken by native Spanish speakers. So this list objectively analyzes how frequent every word is in Spanish. The first number on the left is what order the words occur in. So the number one word in Spanish is que. The number two is de. The number three is no. And then beside these, you can see how much of the language is that word. So 3% of the language is que. 3% of all words spoken in Spanish are de. And more than 10% is these first 4 words by themselves. So the LearnCraft Spanish curriculum is structured directly based on this list. We start with the most frequent words and we work our way down from there systematically. Now this list is a little overwhelming to look at, and this is kind of a boring way to look at it, so let's change the way that we depict this. Imagine that the entire Spanish language is a wine glass that we've smashed on the floor. And each piece is an individual word, but the size of the piece is based on how often that word is actually used by native Spanish speakers. Here's what that would look like. These are just the top 100 words in Spanish, and they're sized based on how often they're used. So what we can do is we can start by learning the biggest pieces first. This is just like picking up the biggest pieces of glass first. And what's fun is the biggest ones are also the ones that connect to the most other pieces. And this is super important because the way that words connect together is the essence of how a language works. It's not just about learning the definition of a word. Spanish and Spanish grammar all come down to, when you do learn a word, how do you use it along with the other words that you know? So that's a lot like picking up a piece of glass, and instead of just waving it around, you're sticking it together with all the other pieces that you actually know how to use. And the biggest pieces are the ones that connect to the most other pieces in the most important ways. And it does take time to make sure you really know how to connect each of these big important pieces together. This is the hard part of learning Spanish. But it pays off. Once you do master the top 100 words in Spanish, you literally have half of the glass put together. And that's enough to start holding water, so to speak. So when we teach our students the first 100 words in Spanish, they become effectively fluent with these 100 words. Here are some real examples that our students practice and get really proficient with after just 100 words in Spanish. Notice that these are really grammatically complex and they use the same words over and over, but in different combinations. After this point, everything gets easier from there. So for example, let's say that it's time to learn the verb decir, like we were saying. You'll specifically practice decir only with words you've already learned, words that are higher on the frequency list. So that means sentences like this. Now, this may look tricky, so these are not easy structures to master. They're not as grammatically simple as the kind of babyish sentences that ChatGPT gave you, but if you've put all the bigger pieces together first, then by the time you get to the verb decir, after about 3 months of learning Spanish, you're actually going to know how to do this. These will be the right things to practice, and you'll be really good at this. And imagine how much confidence this gives you, knowing with each piece of the puzzle that you're working on the right one, the one that is the biggest next piece to fit in. Of course, this does require getting all the right types of practice and truly mastering all these words in connection with one another. And so to get really concrete with how to make all of this work, how to make your words fit together like the pieces of a puzzle, I'm going to tell you the story of how our student, Ashley, did this with the verb decir. About a year ago, Ashley didn't just want to learn Spanish. She had a deep and urgent need. Ashley is an immigration attorney, and as she says, the majority of my clients, at least 95%, speak only Spanish. Now, note that the quotes that you're seeing from Ashley are actually in Spanish because they're from a Spanish interview that she did. But for this video, I'll summarize what she's saying in English. As a little background, Ashley studied Spanish for 4 years in school, but her skills felt completely scattered and unusable. She says that in her previous Spanish studies, they spent a lot of time memorizing words and conjugations, but she didn't really understand how to put them together. She was able to say phrases like, ¿Dónde está el baño? But this was not helping her connect with her immigration clients. When Ashley found LearnCraft Spanish, she was surprised at how different the approach was, especially the order of the process. So putting together the biggest pieces first was new to her. She says, we never spent much time trying to memorize random words and conjugations. We started with the most useful verbs and practicing how to use them in real phrases. So here are some of the flashcards that Ashley used to practice right from the beginning. These are using a lot of the same words, but they're using them in a wide variety of ways and different combinations. And also notice how complex the grammar is. These only use the top 100 words in Spanish, but they use it in lots of different ways. So instead of just memorizing random words and verb conjugations that are disconnected from anything she's going to say, everything she learned was in a context where it all connects together. Ashley says, we started with the normal phrases that you're going to use every day, and I felt more comfortable expressing myself after just a few weeks. And of course, it only got better from there. So after about 3 months, she was ready for the verb decir. Here's an example of how she practiced decir. So she worked with these flashcards that combine decir with everything else she's learned. But it wasn't just flashcards. She had other ways to practice these as well. For example, here's what we call an audio quiz. It's like a flashcard, but it actually involves speaking out loud to try to drill these things. So if Ashley is in here practicing the verb decir, she can start by hearing an English sentence.
I am saying it many times.
And then she has a pause to try to guess and predict the Spanish. And then she hears the Spanish.
Lo estoy diciendo muchas veces.
His son tells us to go home.
Guess the Spanish. And then see if you're right.
Su hijo nos dice que vayamos a casa.
So as she's doing these exercises, she has to try to come up with the right conjugation of decir in each case. And again, there's no random Spanish here. Everything in this quiz is all within what Ashley already knows how to use. And it's not just flashcards and speaking quizzes, there were also listening quizzes. So we can have the Spanish play first, and then you'll hear the Spanish and see if you can identify how the verb decir is being used.
¿Le tienes que decir todo?
And then you try to figure out how it's being used and see if you got it right.
¿Le tienes que decir todo?
Do you have to tell her everything?
Another one.
Dicen que ya lo dijeron. Dicen que ya lo dijeron.
They're saying that they already said it.
Te está diciendo que su casa es buena. Te está diciendo que su casa es buena.
We also gave her writing assignments so that she could practice using decir in sentences that she wrote herself, whether translating them like in this example or writing her own sentences. And then remember that Ashley wasn't just practicing these things in her daily study, she was also practicing it face-to-face with her Spanish coach. So her coach was aligned with these methods and every week knew exactly where Ashley was and practiced those things in each session. She says here, I think the most useful thing was that the classes gave me the confidence to express myself with native speakers. So by practicing high-frequency vocabulary in the right order and in a variety of ways, she built her confidence within weeks. After about 12 months, here's where she is now. She says, when I started the class, I couldn't say more than maybe 10 words in Spanish. After a year, now I can talk with Spanish speakers all day. I talk with my clients, with my colleagues, with everyone. I feel like my life has expanded so much. I've learned so much, not only about a language, but also about other cultures and countries. And it all came from just starting with the top 100 words, just the biggest pieces of the Spanish puzzle. She really mastered each one step by step, and she worked her way down the list from there through the top 1,000 words in Spanish. You can watch Ashley's full Spanish interview, which she did after only 12 months, at learncraftspanish.com/testimonials. So now we've covered how you can master Spanish grammar simply by going in frequency order, step by step. With each new word, explore all the ways that that word connects with all the words you already know. But what about comprehension? It's one thing to know how to put Spanish words together on your own. It's another when you hear them spoken at a native speed in contexts you don't know. So this is one of the biggest obstacles that beginner and especially intermediate language learners run into. But the good news is you're already on your way to mastering this. Just follow the same technique we've already been following, but specifically focused on listening comprehension. Here's why this is important. If you go around just listening to as much Spanish as you can and trying to understand more and more, that's a really inefficient and random approach. That's just like playing with the little pieces of glass and just trying to wait for certain pieces to stick together. I mean, you might eventually find success that way, but it's not the fastest way to get this glass to hold water. So instead, let's keep following our step-by-step system. What if, after we learn the first 50 words, we practice tuning our ear just to recognize all the different combinations of those words when we hear them? And then we do the same thing for the top 100 words, the top 200 words, and so on. If you do that, and you work your way all the way down through the top 1,000 words, your Spanish is going to start holding water. You'll be able to listen to the vast majority of real-life Spanish and understand what you're hearing. Again, from focusing, not from just listening to lots of random stuff. But what's hard about this is finding the right stuff to practice with that actually is within what you're able to understand. You want it to sink in and really be productive practice. So when you're looking for Spanish materials to practice with, what I would recommend is finding native materials that conform to these two criteria. Number one, you can understand at least 80% of what you're hearing. There's no use listening to stuff that's so far beyond you, you can't learn from it at all. And then number two, you want to have a written transcript of what you're hearing so that you can use what you're listening to get to better comprehension. You want to be able to test yourself, make sure you're understanding it, and then for any parts that are tricky, you want to be able to read them and analyze them so that you can tune your ear even more sharply. If you do this, and you start with the top 100 words in Spanish, really tune your ear to all of that, and then keep using materials that go beyond that, you can tune your ear to understand Spanish better and better, step by step. It's not magic. Here's how our student Donald did it. Donald has wanted to understand Spanish better for years. As a nurse, he interacts with patients and coworkers who speak Spanish every day. And understanding Spanish is really important, especially for his patients. Donald has always wanted to be able to understand Spanish podcasts, TV, and movies, and his eventual dream is to move to Latin America. Donald worked on Spanish for years, but traditional methods were not working for him. So before working with us, he was able to understand and speak some Spanish, but it was very difficult. Everything changed when Donald discovered LearnCraft Spanish. He loved how clear and step-by-step the method was, especially the focus on foundational grammatical structures. For the first time, Spanish wasn't just an infinite menu of sounds and words. Instead, Donald was listening to core templates and idioms over and over again, but in new variety each time. He quickly came to start recognizing the patterns when he heard them. Donald got to use our tools to practice his listening comprehension just like Ashley did and all of our other students. So let's say, for example, he wants to tune his ear to hear the differences between lo que and la que. He could just go to our quizzing app and do a listening quiz on that specific topic. So check this out. I'm just searching for lo que and la que, and I'm going to go down and choose an audio listening quiz. And let's say Donald is on lesson 40 right now. We'll listen to a few examples that use lo que or la que.
Ha sido lo que yo soy ahora.
So we can tell that was lo que.
Ha sido lo que yo soy ahora.
All right, next one.
Ha sido lo que yo soy ahora.
She has been what I am now.
All right, next one. And see if you can tell what's being said.
Ella y la que está conmigo han sido buenas. Ella y la que está conmigo han sido buenas.
She and the one that is with me have been good.
So again, these are using complex grammar, but it's all within what Donald knows, so he's able to recognize these patterns and what's being said. Now let's change it. Let's say that it's a few weeks later. He still wants to practice lo que and la que, but he's all the way in lesson 80. Let's see what that would sound like.
¿Quieres saber lo que ellos sabían? ¿Quieres saber lo que ellos sabían?
Do you want to know what they knew?
All right, one more.
Hola, yo soy la que está haciendo eso. Hola, yo soy la que está haciendo eso.
So previously, really fast phrases like this with the tiny little words would have been really tough for Donald to catch. But imagine how much easier it became over time because he could really tune his ears to hear these patterns. And he could do it just within all the vocabulary that he knew, the high-frequency Spanish vocabulary that he already knew how to use. Besides all of that, he also got a story every week to listen to and try to understand everything he'd been learning, but in a conversation context. And then, of course, he got to put it into practice face-to-face every week with his coach. This reinforced everything he was learning because his coach always spoke with him using the exact vocabulary and structures that he knew. So he wasn't overwhelmed with a bunch of Spanish that would derail him. Instead, he was just challenged enough to push his listening skills further and further, step by step. He says, "The trainers know how to explain difficult concepts and they make me feel comfortable trying to understand new things and speak with more confidence." Within less than a year, the results were remarkable. So Donald can now understand at least 75% of the Spanish that he hears, and sometimes more. So he has a lot more confidence, he now speaks with his coworkers and patients in Spanish, and he can now listen to Spanish podcasts and watch Spanish TV and movies without English subtitles, and without having to look up words all the time. This is the power of starting with the core pieces first and working them up to perfection one step at a time. Of course, it does require some very diligent work. So what Donald says is that LearnCraft is the course with the most effective method. It's worth the time, the money, and the daily effort. And you can watch Donald's interview in Fluent Spanish at learncraftspanish.com/testimonials. So now we've talked about how to work through grammar step by step just by going based on frequency order and connecting all the words that you know together. And we've talked about how this applies to listening comprehension as well. You can practice listening to things within that high frequency and just practicing step by step, pushing out your comfort a little bit at a time. But what about face-to-face practice and the confidence of using your Spanish out loud in front of a native Spanish speaker? This is one of the things that really intimidates people the most. As you can see from all these comments, just speaking face-to-face can make you freeze up, it can make you embarrassed, you might be afraid of making mistakes, or, worst of all, you might learn Spanish and think you know it really well, but the moment you're face-to-face with somebody, it seems to all disappear. And that's so discouraging because the whole reason that you're learning Spanish is to connect with people in conversation. The last thing that you want is to do all this work that I'm describing, learning your grammar step by step, learning your comprehension step by step, and then still never being able to use it face to face. And here's the paradox of this whole thing. So the goal is to be less afraid, but the fear is what's preventing you from actually practicing face to face. And that practice face to face is the only way to break through the fear. So unfortunately, I don't have a magic pill where you can just suddenly be confident and speak Spanish face-to-face with everybody you meet. You are going to have to push through this. But you can even do this step by step. You don't have to have some magical leap from no confidence to full confidence. Instead, you can start small and build your confidence just a little bit at a time. It's not magic. It doesn't require you to be an extrovert or to be constantly talking with people in Spanish. You don't have to dial random numbers and speak with Spanish speakers over the phone. Instead, I'm going to show you a step-by-step system where you'll start from the level that you are, and you'll push your confidence out just a little bit at a time from there until you are able to have those deep personal connections in Spanish face-to-face. To show you how this works, here's Michael's story. Michael had a deep need to learn Spanish. He needed to connect more deeply with his fiancée's family, and they're from Colombia. It had been years that he had been wanting to connect better with them, but he didn't have the confidence. And his goal was truly to be a part of their family. He was tired of being just a spectator of family gatherings and being left out of their conversations, especially because his long-term goal was to have kids with his fiancée and truly become a part of their family and their world. Eventually, this frustration kind of reached a breaking point where this became the most important thing in his life. Now, he had started out with what most learners try: apps, beginner phrases, vocabulary words with no real structure. But he still couldn't understand Spanish at all. He still felt confused in even the most basic conversations. He was insecure and nervous around anyone who spoke Spanish, especially his fiancée's parents. But Michael had an enormous breakthrough as soon as he started working with a professional language coach. Within the first month, the changes were already so dramatic that even his girlfriend's mother asked him, "Mike, ¿qué pasó? Eres mejor de repente." And here's what we did with him to make this happen. We followed a 5-step system for building face-to-face confidence. So of course, first of all, we started him off with high-frequency vocabulary and that foundational Spanish that's flexible enough that he can combine his words in new ways. But of course, we knew that he didn't just want to know stuff, he needed to build up that face-to-face confidence as quickly as possible. So here are the 5 steps that we used to do this. First of all, we told him that while he was studying on his own, he needed to speak his Spanish out loud. So remember all of those foundational sentences that we gave other students as well. We told him, as you study these, don't just nod and go, "Okay, I understand that sentence." You have to speak it out loud because that builds the muscle memory of opening your mouth and saying Spanish. That's the absolute foundational first step to confidence, is just being able to open your mouth and say Spanish. The second step, and this is really important but very neglected by most students, is to speak out loud without looking while you're studying. So if he saw the sentence, "Quiero que estés aquí," he didn't just read it from the flashcard or from whatever he was studying. He would look away, maybe look out the window, and say, "Quiero que estés aquí." This helps build that bridge between studying Spanish and the idea of looking at someone and speaking it out loud. The next step is to speak variations out loud. So instead of just saying, "Quiero que estés aquí," he might say, "Quiero que mis amigos estén aquí." This helps simulate what it's like to have to say your own sentences in a real conversation, but he can do it in a controlled environment. It's not way too far outside of his comfort zone. The next step up from there is a big one. He spoke face to face, but in a controlled environment, specifically with his coach, Carolina. Carolina knew exactly where he was, what his current vocabulary was, and what he needed to build confidence with. So for example, if that week he was still working on the top 100 words in Spanish and he was struggling with por versus para, Carolina might work with him on some sentences and questions and little conversations that would encourage him to use those words, and she would gently correct him. She knew what the biggest pieces were that he needed to build that confidence that exact week. And then, of course, the final step is to do a little bit of speaking face-to-face with his friends and family in Spanish. And his task was to repeat this every week. So by starting by practicing Spanish on his own, but out loud, then doing it with his coach, and then eventually in front of his future in-laws, he built that confidence step by step. This helped Michael grow confident very quickly, and he completely overcame his fears of speaking with his in-laws. Michael says, "Now I have no problem with confidence in Spanish. I can order in restaurants. I have very few problems with understanding the family of my fiancé." And Michael's now truly a part of their lives. He says it feels like an entire world has opened to him. Now that he's successfully built that confidence systematically, step by step, he's truly a part of their family, and he's excited to grow that family together with them in Spanish. He says, "When we have kids, I'll be able to talk with them in Spanish and teach them to communicate with their grandparents." And Michael accomplished all of this in 12 months, working with the LearnCraft Spanish coaches and going basically from no Spanish at all to being able to become a part of his fiancé's family and connect with them confidently. You can watch Michael's interview in Fluent Spanish at learncraftspanish.com/testimonials. And Michael's not alone. So at the testimonial page, you'll see that there are dozens of stories of people who have done exactly what Michael has done. So in summary, you can become fluent in Spanish, and you can do it step by step. It's not magic. All that it requires is that you start with the most important stuff first, those biggest pieces of glass. Then relentlessly polish them, put them together with everything you already know, and practice in a variety of ways, including speaking, listening, and of course, face-to-face confidence. And you can start right now. We release our entire curriculum for free via the LearnCraft Spanish podcast. Or if you want to take it to the next level and you want to go through the entire program that all of these students used, including our quizzing app and the face-to-face coaching, there's info below this video. If you're watching this video when it comes out, we're currently running a Black Friday special with a special price and some bonuses. But even if not, if you're inspired by the student stories from this video and from our testimonials page, I would encourage you to read about our coaching or just explore the podcast for free. And then of course you can subscribe to this channel and I'll keep sharing tips and tricks that you can use to become fluent in Spanish faster than ever.